Welcome to this tutorial on using Excel to create a cumulative frequency distribution and a graph of the distribution called an ogive. The first technique uses COUNTIFS as a function and then inserts an Xy Scatterplot to create the ogive. The second technique uses pivot tables to create a cumulative percentage distribution and then the insert chart tool to create the ogive. You do not need both of these techniques. Each one can stand on its own and accomplishes more or less the same thing. So let's get started. Let's use this data set containing the grades of 50 students. To create a cumulative frequency distribution, we can look at the grades and ask questions like, how many students got a 50 or less? How many students got a 60 or less? How many students got a 70 or less? And so on. A frequency distribution will tell us how many students got between, say, a 50 or a 60, but it doesn't include those students who got less than a 50, only the students in each grouping. All right, in order to do this, let's first copy and paste the grade column onto a new sheet. So let's highlight the grade column, copy, and let's select a new sheet and paste it onto a new sheet. Let's first calculate the min and the max. So to do this, let's type min and max. Now the reason we're doing this is that in order to group quantitative data such as grades, we first have to define lower and upper boundaries for each of our class groupings. So to calculate the minimum, we do equal min A2 to A51, close parentheses, and that gives us the minimum number. And then for the maximum number, equal max and again we have A1 to A51, close parentheses. Okay, so now we have the min and the max. The minimum number is 55, the maximum number is 99. Now in order to group quantitative data such as grades, we usually define upper and lower boundaries for each of our class groupings. First we have to decide how many class groupings we want, and then we would calculate what is called the width of the interval. I did that on a previous video, but with grade data, we typically list grades in 10-point intervals. Now with cumulative frequency distributions, we are only really interested in the upper limit. So let's start with a heading here, upper limit. Then we have cumulative frequency. Then we have cumulative percentage. Okay, now we want to know where we start. So our starting would be where the minimum is, and that would be the first upper limit. And then we also want to know what the width of the interval would be. So let's type WOI for width of interval. Now we need to define our first upper limit, and we can get this from the minimum. It says that the minimum is 55, so let's start our upper limit at 50. And this is purely subjective. You could decide to start at a 55, but that doesn't really make sense for grade data, because if you start at 55, then your intervals would be every 5 points or every 10 points. You'd have to decide that. I'd like it to start at 50 and have my width of the interval every 10 points. And that's typical with grade data. With grade data, we traditionally list the grades in increments of 10, since every 10 points is usually what distinguishes an A from a B to a C, and so on. We only need an upper limit when we use COUNTIFS. So I'm going to start with an upper limit of 50, because I really don't have any grade data below 50. And now the cell below that, I'm going to write the upper limit is 50 plus the width of the interval. But instead of typing 50 plus 10 or typing 60, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in a formula. I'm going to type in equal, and then I'm going to type in the 50, but instead of 50, I'm going to type in E11, and that's a relative cell reference, so it'll change each cell down. And then I'm going to type in the cell for the width of the interval. So we have E11 plus E5, but for E5, we want that to be an absolute cell reference. Now, in order to lock that in as an absolute cell reference, you press the Fn key and press F4, and then you'll see that it puts a $ before the E and a $ before the 5. It fixes the cell to be an absolute cell reference instead of a relative cell reference. So E11 is a relative cell reference. E5 is an absolute cell reference, and you'll see in a moment why I did that. Now let's copy the formula all the way down. So this would be 60, pull the fill handle, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, and there you have the upper limits for each of the boundaries. Now, why did that work? I have E11 as 50, and when you go down to 12, it is E11 plus E5. E11 is a relative cell reference because we want that to change for each row as we go down. E5, we want it to stay the same because the width of the interval will stay the same, 10, it doesn't change. If it was a relative cell reference, the reference would go from E5 to E6 to E7 each time we copied the formula down. We don't want that to happen. We want it fixed, right? If you click here, you'll see 70. E is not E11 plus E5. Now it's E12 plus E5. Click on 80. Now it's E13 plus E5. Click on 90. Now it's E14 plus E5. Click on 100 and you see it's E15 plus E5. So the first cell reference is relative and it moves down the column. And the second cell reference, E5, is fixed. That's an absolute cell reference. It's always 10. So it's always the upper limit plus 10. All right, so now that we have the upper limits, what we want to know is what the cumulative frequency is for grades for each of those classes. Now, under the column marked cumulative frequency, let's type into the first cell equal to COUNTIFS, and then we're going to have the range of cells with the grades, plus put Fn function F4 to lock them in as absolute cell references, because the range never changes. Open parentheses. Let's type in the range. You can just type it in, or you can select it. And I'm going to click on Fn, that's the function key on my laptop, and then the F4 key. And you see that automatically puts $ and marks it or fixes it as absolute cell references. If you're using a different kind of computer, then you're going to have to Google and figure out how to do that, or just type a $ before each letter and each number. Okay, so we have COUNTIFS, and we have the range, and now we put a comma, and now for the criteria, which goes in double quotes, we would put double quotes, less than or equal to, and then we say and E11, double quote, and E11. And that would be a relative cell reference because we want it to go from E11 to E12 to E13, 14, 15, and 16. So here we are combining the criteria with a cell reference that contains the upper limit. And now I can close the parentheses and click enter. And so the cumulative frequency for all the numbers below 50, the upper limit is 50, the cumulative frequency is 0. Let's take a look at the formula we created one more time. You can see we have an equal sign since every formula starts that way. Then the function COUNTIFS. Then in parentheses we have the range of cells that contain the data that we're looking at, in this case the grade data. And we make sure to lock them in or fix them using the function F4 key or by putting $ so that they are absolute cell references. And then we have a comma and then the criteria. The criteria needs an operator and a number or cell reference. We could say less than or equal to 10, but then we would have to type that in each cell, less than or equal to 10, less than or equal to 20, less than or equal to 30, and so on. So it's easier to type in a cell reference for the first upper limit, and you can see I put in E11 as the cell reference for the first upper limit, and it's a relative cell reference, so it will change as we copy the formula down the column. Now when we copy and paste this down the column, that cell reference will become E12, E13, and so on. And let's see how that works. All right, we're going to grab a hold of the fill handle down here, copy it down, and we can see if I click here, notice now it is a relative cell reference of E11. If I click in this cell, now the relative cell reference is E12. If I click here, the relative cell reference is E13. Let's click down, E14, E15, E16. So the formula here works to count the entire range of cells to see if the numbers are less than or equal to whatever the upper limit is. So here we have the upper limit of 50, and the cumulative frequency is 0. That is, the number of values less than or equal to 50 is 0. For 60, the number of grades less than or equal to a 60 is 1. The number of grades less than or equal to 70 is 12. That means 12 students got 70 or less. Here we have 29 as the cumulative frequency for a grade of 80. That means 29 students got 80 or less. 43 students got 90 or less, and 50 students got 100 or less. And we know that we have 50 students, so that makes sense. The last line in your cumulative frequency distribution should be the number of data points that you have. In this case, we have 50 data grades. Moving on to the next column, we have cumulative percentage. So what we want to do here is turn each of these frequency counts into a percentage, but we want it to be cumulative percentage. So instead of having 50 as cumulative frequency, we would have 100% in this cell for a cumulative percentage. So let's see how we would do that. So now in this column, we want to get the percentage, which is the number in each cell divided by the total. So let's first pre-format the cells so that they will show as percentages. I'm going to select these cells, and I'm going to pre-format them by going up here where it says General and change it to percentage. Okay, now let's type in here equal to, and we're going to take the first cell, which is F11, divided by the total, and F11 is a relative cell reference, but the total has to be an absolute cell reference because that doesn't change. So we're going to hit F4, function F4, and now what I'm going to do is pull this handle down all the way down here, and you can see the percentages are now filled in. 0 out of 50 is 0%, 1 out of 50 is 2%, 12 out of 50 is 24%, 29 out of 50 is 58%, 43 out of 50 is 86%, and 50 out of 50 is 100%. So you can see that the cumulative percentage distribution ends with 100%, which makes sense, of course, since 100% of the grades are 100 or less. Okay, next we can make an ogive from this data. There are a few ways to do this. One way is to make an Xy scatterplot. In order to do this, we plot the upper limits on the x-axis and the cumulative frequencies on the y-axis. Okay, so let's first start by making two columns. Let's make an x column and a y column. And the x-axis is going to be the upper limits and now let's copy the cumulative percentages to the y column. Now let's change these to percentages. Okay, there we go. We have an X column that has the upper limits. We have the Y column with the cumulative percentages. Now let's highlight these two columns. Let's go up to where it says Insert, and now we go to the Scatter Plot, and we go to not this one, but the one where we have a model here, Scatter with Straight Lines and Markers, and that's what we would click on, and there we have our ogive. So here you can see where it starts at 0, and it goes up to 100%. Now let's see how we would create a cumulative frequency distribution a different way, which is not using the COUNTIFS, but rather to use pivot tables. Okay, let's go back to the grade column. And what we do is we click on a cell and click on Insert Pivot Table. First, let's drag grades down to the row area where it's grades, grade on exam. So let's drag that down to the rows area. Right-click into one of the grades and click on Group. You see here where it says Group. And now we can say where we want to start and end by, and it actually auto-filled it, start at 55, end at 99, and by 10. Let's make it to start at 50 instead of 55. And let's make it end at 100. Group by 10 is okay. All right, so let's do okay. And now we have groupings 50 to 59, 60 to 69, 70 to 79, and that's perfect. Okay, so now that we have the class groupings, now what we do is we simply drag the grades again, but this time we drag them down to the values area here. And now we have what's called a frequency distribution, and we can change this label to frequency so that it says frequency distribution. Now let's make 2 more columns, and to do that we drag the labels down 2 more times. So we're going to drag grades down 2 more times to the values area, 1 and 2. Okay, so now we have 3 columns. The first column is grade, it's frequency. Let's change this to a percentage frequency. So right-click into the cell, click on Show Values as percent of grand total, and there you go, you have a percentage frequency. Relative frequency, and now we have percentage. And last column, we want to have a cumulative frequency. So let's click again in a cell in the 3rd column. Let's right-click, Show Values As. And now what we want is running total in. And let's click on that, and we get a dialog box, and it says based on which field. And it should say grades, and it does, so we're going to click OK. Okay, and this would be a cumulative frequency. So now we just got a cumulative frequency. And we can do this one more time. Let's drag another value down and right-click and show values as percentage running total. And there you have your cumulative percentage. Cumulative percentage. Okay, so now to do a chart, let's just do frequency and cumulative frequency. So what we should do is we should drag off the columns. Okay, so let's drag off the cumulative frequency. Okay, so now we have frequency and cumulative percentage, and let's see if we can make ourselves a combo chart. Okay, here it is, Insert Combo Chart. And so we can create, there you go. That one looks good. No, but we want the gap to be 0. Because this is quantitative data, we want it to be a histogram. Let's click on the columns. And if I right If I right-click on the columns, I get a task pane here with the gap width 150%. Let's make the gap width at 0, and that closes the gap between the bars. So the way we got to that was right-clicking on the bar, getting this task pane, and then selecting the gap width to 0, and that'll do it. There we have it. We have a combo chart with a histogram and an ogive superimposed. So if you're using the pivot tables, you have to get rid of some of the columns and then insert the combo chart. Otherwise, it would have used all 4 of the columns, and that would have been too much data. And there you have it. Now you can create a cumulative percentage distribution and frequency distribution simply by using pivot tables. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something.